Hey, thank you all so much for joining another episode of Celeste the Therapist podcast. My name is Celeste, and I am a therapist from Boston. And I have two special guests with me. I'm really excited to have a conversation with them. I'm going to have you all introduce yourself to my audience.
Absolutely. Go ahead.
I'm Shaté Hayes.
And I am Scott Hayes. We are the Love Haze podcast.
That was cute. So they are actually living in a place that my team defeated them. Embarrassing. So embarrassing. But we ain't got to go there. Do you want to go there? No, I'm just kidding. We ain't got
No, we're past. It's hard to be a sports fan in Atlanta, just in general. So
Atlanta. They're from Atlanta. And they are married. How long have you guys been married?
3 years.
3 years. And they have a podcast, a really great podcast. Shaté, can you tell the people about your podcast and what it's about?
Yes, thanks, Celeste. First of all, thank you for having us on. We're really excited and love the work that you're doing and the body of work that you've built around thinking differently. So the Love Haze podcast is conversations about wholeness, about well-being. So we say we host conversations to empower the social, mental, financial, and career well-being of the Black community. Our podcast specifically, those conversations are really about speaking out loud what most people experience in silence. So divorce, career transition, navigating adult relationships, our fertility journey, like all these things that, people I think talk about mostly behind closed doors. We talk about out loud so that we can normalize the experiences. So many things people go through have them feeling isolated. Like, am I the only one? Is something wrong with me? And so we just want to talk about those things so people know you're not alone and you can get through it,
Yeah, I love that so much, especially for the Black community, given the fact that, I grew up in church, and a lot of the way I was feeling growing up, struggling with being depressed, I felt like I wasn't doing something right?
Yes.
It took me going to a medical facility with having medical symptoms before it hit me. Even when that happened, it didn't hit me. And so being able, I think the curve has changed a lot, where people can recognize it's okay to go to church, but it's also okay to do therapy. It felt like such a huge stigma. Was that kind of, Scott, I'll go with you. What was your kind of upbringing like, and how did you get into this wellness world? Because you are a social worker. How did you become a social worker and got to the point to, creating this podcast with your wife?
I really grew up in a religious kind of environment, not as strict religious, I should say, but just kind of this idea that long suffering was the thing, right? And everything should be, hurt and pain. And then there was hellfire and brimstone, and just had a really negative association going from my teen years into my 20s. And
can I pause right there? What do you think that's about? Because that was the disconnect I felt growing up in church. Of why I'm reading about renewing your mind and a lot of the things I talk about, where it came from my upbringing in church. But then I felt the pain and the suffering. Why do you think there's this thing? And Shaté or Scott can answer. Why do you think there's this thing where our community looks at that as kind of like a badge of honor? I feel.
Listen, slavery. That's my answer, because we are often taught in our community the version of Christianity that slave owners taught their slaves to keep them submissive and subservient. And so it is, hold on, follow your master, do good work, and then the sweet by and by you'll get your reward. So even though it's hard right now, hang in there. Just stay in these conditions and it'll be fine. And I don't think a lot of folks realize that, honestly. I'm so excited that there are a lot of younger pastors these days really preaching God and therapy. And I even heard TD Jakes call that out. Like, you got to be mindful of the version of Christianity that you're receiving, but it's absolutely to keep us like in bondage because of our history here.
Yeah, and it promotes that kind of scarcity mindset.
Yep.
Like, you know, like Shaté said, a blessing is coming in a sweet by and by. You'll get it when you get to heaven. And it's just not how I live my life. I want mine right now. And I believe that God wants that for me, right? And, you know, I think that, you know, we just have to get out of that mindset. And it's something that I really struggle to get out of because I got so used to like not enoughness that mindset helped me buy into like I was not enough. I was not enough for God. I was not enough for the things that I wanted. And if I just held on and had faith and just kept on grinding, then one day God would find me worthy enough to bless me. And I don't receive that anymore.
Because we are already.
Yes. Scott, what was your turning point? You know, because I think that a lot of people kind of struggle with that. And everybody's turning point looks different. You know, the purpose of this podcast is to let people know they're not alone and they may hear a story that's related to theirs. You know, I always say Alcoholics Anonymous works so well because it's not like a clinical environment, but you have people that have gone the journey and people say, oh, wow, if they can do it, like I can work on it. What was a turning point for you to know, like, no, I can have peace, you know, peace of mind and I can have blessings on earth. I don't have to wait and suffer.
It was actually when I began going through my divorce. You know, I realized in the process of starting my own therapy journey at that time that I really had this mindset that I was supposed to be this thing for everybody else and that my happiness should come when other people are happy as a result of what I do. That means providing for my wife at the time, paying the bills, not complaining, not saying that I needed anything, showing up the same way for my family, not needing anything, but being like this Superman and not needing anything in return. And what was happening was that I really needed those things. I silently resented my wife at the time. I silently resented my family and I acted out on that resentment, but I kept the peace at home. And that kind of upbringing helped me to solidify that I needed to suffer in silence, not say anything. And as I was going through my divorce, I found out that, you know, my parents had gone through a whole bunch of stuff and they hid it, you know, from their children because people have this mindset, like, don't be in grown folks' business. Right. And so I thought I was doing marriage wrong because I was experiencing this failure. And coming to find out that, you know, I knew my father was an alcoholic, but I didn't know that my mother wanted to leave him so many times. I didn't know that she stayed because of her own religious beliefs. I can remember wanting my parents to divorce, but they made it seem like they were so happy and that I was doing it so wrong. And I didn't find out until I was going through the divorce, like the totality of the problems that they were having. And then I started having conversations with my friends who were having all these problems and were thinking about leaving, but had stayed. And I was like, nobody's having these conversations and nobody realizes that they deserve to be happy. Right.
No, but on the gram, everybody's happy, ain't they?
Right.
I like real.
And for the first time, I was able to like confront my own delusions of what, you know, I thought a husband should be. And just realistically say, yes, I made a promise, but you know what? I changed my mind because my needs are different.
Yeah. Not just that, though, not just the needs. I think he also mentions often that his partner at the time was really speaking about him in a way that he no longer identified or didn't choose to identify. So, you know, you're not going to ever be anything, you know, just kind of like not affirming his wholeness, or it's like assigning the mistake to who he was as a human. Right. And so, and could not get out of that. And so I think that's another thing that he mentioned. Sorry, don't mean to speak for you, but I think that's an important part of the story too, you know?
No, thank you for bringing that up. Because, you know, people in relationships, I think it's important to know, because I think sometimes as people are growing and there's been maybe like hurt or pain, and if we're not like, especially if you're in a relationship, if you're not working on growth together, there's, you know, going to be this unbalance, which you guys spoke about on the your last podcast, where when things aren't balanced in a relationship, something's not going to work out. Right. I got one more question for you. Then we're going to hear about Shaté's journey. But so we talked about the church piece of your journey, but what part of being a Black man in America you think played a role in this, like stuffing all of those emotions that you were having or not naming at the time?
I think it was more about this idea that men are stoic, right? And especially Black men, we have to show up as stoic and tough, and we don't get to feel. We don't get to be human first. And being a man is showing up for everybody in your life and basically ignoring how you feel. Right. And what I found is that if it comes up, it's going to come out. And it is really about like what your vice is that is going to be pointed to. Mine happened to be like DMing other women at the time, you know, for the clients that I work with, their vice of choice is alcohol and drugs. And what I've noticed with them is that, and with myself as well, is that it's tied to an emotion. Yeah. But when society tells you that you should not feel this thing that you are feeling, you begin to believe that you are somehow less than a man. And for Black men in particular, we want to be functioning. So if you bring one of those packages in here from IKEA right now, one of those little shelves that's written in German, I'll put it together, right? But it's going to be some screws left over, and it ain't going to be able to hold no weight. And essentially, that's what I was. I was a Black man who was well put together, but I couldn't hold any weight, right? If you put any pressure on me, then it's over with. Right. And so when we don't walk into the fullness of our humanity as Black men, then we can't hold anything. And the first thing that we do is we'll make peace and make it look good. But we, raising hell with ourselves and playing with our toys, in our caves and just trying to cover it up.
Yeah. Don't you want to just give them your tithes? Like,
I know. I was like, yo, you just said a word, brother. I mean, we need to you're all about talking out loud and it's so important that people hear this because it's like the audacity of us to think that we can like stuff our feelings and we're human and that we can not talk about these experiences as if they just go away because they were in the past. Yeah. And so, I started my work in working in a homeless shelter, people struggling with substance use. And, I was only 19, I'm 40 now, but learning their stories, I'm like, oh, and I didn't understand substance abuse, right? Like, I said, oh, something happened. Like this at my young age, not really understanding everything. This is why you're using. It's because you're trying to mitigate the pain. Nobody's teaching us how to mitigate the pain, right? Yeah. Especially for men, right? And we're going to talk about Black women, Shaté, and learn about like your journey. But does that make sense around like the way Black anger is more acceptable, partying, sleeping with women is more acceptable, and using is more acceptable than going to therapy? Like that's crazy.
Right. It gives you this bravado, right? In the things that we, are allowed to have by societal norms. And then you have the dynamic of for me, the two things that Black men have to get through, right? We have to be accepted into society, right? But we also have to be accepted first by our peers. And a lot of that bravado and covering with, like women and machismo and all these other things, it happens on the end of trying to get acceptance on both of those levels. And we just missed up with not feeling the things that we feel and being able to call out what our emotions really are.
I wonder how much of that is racial trauma as well. Because if you think about how Black men especially were treated and emasculated and, all of those things. So, I just wonder, I'm sure there's something there as well. I don't have any data.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Every time I think about the way they had to watch their wives suffer and the pain and the anger that they felt, it's like, wow, and it, obviously the stuff carries generation to generation, right? Yeah. I think sometimes people are like, oh, this is just the way we are. It's like, no, this is not how we are. This is the environment that we were brought up in, and we had no other lens on life. And so, like, I'm grateful for you sharing this because I think the more people like you and I are sharing this content, somebody else is going to get healing, right? I said, if I could just reach one person like that, my day has been made because that person's going to reach somebody else. So thank you for that, sharing that.
Yeah.
Shaté, my beautiful Black queen.
My lock sister.
I know your mother will pray and speak over tongues according to you. So you definitely grew up. I was always afraid to bring my friends to church because, like, I grew up in church. So then, when I was younger, I'm like, I don't know what they're going to think about all this stuff happening.
Where did you grow up?
Boston, but in
you said that.
Yeah, but the church, like I was, Wednesday prayer, Bible study, Friday night, Sunday, like I'm so paranoid, like about like my kids being hungry because I used to remember being in church Sunday all day hungry. I got some trauma around.
Right. I got some stuck places.
Like going across the street to the corner store, scraping up my coins. Tell me about your upbringing.
Oh, what part of it? Like, where should I go?
You was raised in church, right?
Mm-hmm.
What was your mindset? Do you remember growing up? Like, did you, what you think now about you can have God and therapy? Was that your mindset back then as well?
Absolutely not. I was, oh my goodness. I was living life just doing what I was expected to do. So everything I was taught in church, everything my parents told me, like whatever it is I was supposed to be doing, I was doing that, making good grades, I did my typical teenager stuff where I didn't feel like cleaning up and, stomp down the stairs and slamming cabinets, but nothing too, I didn't really sneak out the house and, it wasn't anything dramatic. I was literally just doing what I was supposed to be doing. I was scared to get in trouble. I was pretty timid.
Can I pause for a second? So with you kind of living life the way you was expected to, when you look back, do you think that brought on any anxiety to like not fail or to do things a certain way and live in a certain box?
Listen, I have whole therapy sessions. I have whole therapy sessions about my people pleasing and the anxiety and just kind of like where I learned to be that way. Like if things were happening in the home, I learned to kind of not be the person that was causing any trouble, essentially. If there was friction between my parents, if there was financial hardships, like let me just do what I need to do so that I'm not an extra burden, right, on the family. And that just bred people pleasing and anxiety and all kinds of things to the point where I didn't even realize how wound up I was. These past couple years in therapy has taught me more about myself than ever. I think though, for me, when I started to get in about my late 20s, early 30s, I started to question the things that I was taught. So I'll say this. Also, when I went to college, I did a little bit start to be like, well, I'm going to make my own choices in some things. So like, I would buck against like, you shouldn't do this. And I'd be like, well, actually, I want to do it. And then after I graduated from college, I moved to LA to be a dancer. That was like unheard of. That wasn't in the plan, for my life. So the fact that I just pivoted that way was a huge shock to my family and it caused a little bit of drama, but we made it through. And then throughout the course of that career pursuit, I really started to choose to unlearn some things in my adult life. I started reading more books. I think I just started becoming aware of life in general. I think I just started to become aware of different ideas and different perspectives and didn't think that, I think Christianity, folks who are Christians can have very closed minds. It's like, this is how it is. There is no other way. And I don't know, there are small things that I can recall in my life, like learning. I went to Catholic school too. So on top of growing up in a very religious home, I went to Catholic school for 7 years and we were taught world religions, interestingly enough. And so learning about Hinduism and Buddhism and that kind of thing, I was like, oh, that I was really interested in that. Or I remember watching the Da Vinci Code, the movie, and thinking like, that's an interesting story about Jesus that I wonder if there's something there. So there were like these little nuggets of curiosity that I think really allowed me to keep my mind open in a way that maybe some folks who grew up the way that I did wouldn't have. And don't get me wrong, I'm grateful for the spiritual foundation that I have. I think that's important. We often say God in therapy. We have shirts that say God in therapy. You think both of them are important. But I think when it comes to religion and to like things that are about tradition, things that are not about your relationship with God, the creative force of the universe, right? Then I think it can become harmful to how someone shows up in the world. So little by little, I guess I would say I started to just unlearn certain things or try to unlearn certain things. And then therapy has helped me a whole lot with just how I think and how I show up.
So we have two different versions, and I love the fact that you guys are together on the show. But for my listeners, we have two different versions on how people kind of came to enlightenment. For Scott, it was kind of like rock bottom, right? Like nobody gets married to get divorced. And for you, it was like the reading and just kind of enlightening yourself. When you said, I want to go back to the part where you said I didn't realize how wound up I was, because what part of also being a Black woman and the expectations that Black women tend to have on, perform. Part of it obviously is just, I think, your personality of like, you just like love helping probably, right? But we can't just do just that and not take care of ourselves. That's where you kind of missed the mark. But what part of being a Black woman and the wounding up, like I didn't realize how wound up, because we don't realize how this stuff shows up in our body, right? I'm always, when people come on session and they're like labored breathing, like, let's take a deep breath. They are not breathing. And I'm like, but you've ignored it since you was a child. So why would you notice it now, right? What part of like your physical manifestations was it wound up in? The part about being a Black woman played a role in your struggles, you think?
Ooh, that's a very good question, and I can immediately.
You on a podcast with a therapist? What you expect?
She better know.
Good
God,
question.
tell her. You should have told her to be ready. You know what I'm saying?
Know what it is.
I wasn't ready for that one. No, but this is a really good question. The physical part I can identify immediately. So I have a dance background. I'll forever be a dancer first. But even as a dancer, my very first, or I think the note that I would always get was drop your shoulders. So it was always just here. It was always like drop your shoulders. Even now, not as a professional, I do Chicago stepping and I love it. When I'm with my partner, or if my partner is an instructor, they're often like, calm down, like you're fine. Like, so I just inhale and hold it and it all comes here. I now get massages regularly because of, sitting at the computer often. And even the massage therapist is like all in my neck. And so it's just, I just hold it here for whatever reason. So that's definitely a thing in terms of how it shows up physically. I also think digestion is like part of like all of that, I think, is connected. So I noticed as an adult that digestive issues, I think, were a thing. And I've started going to acupuncture, and that's been really, really helpful for me in general, something that I've come to love. We started it for fertility, but now I keep it just because I think it's amazing. And I wish I had known about it my whole life. And then the second part, you said just being a Black woman.
Wait, before you go to the Black woman part, I just want to point out to people that as you listen to her share about the different components, the way that we hold on to pain can like manifest in different parts of our body. For me, it was like my back. For you, it's your stomach. I find a lot of people, it happens in their stomach. Heart, sometimes a lot, heart disease, sometimes people end up in therapy because of physical manifestations. So like definitely paying attention to your body and like learn, like when this happens, I notice like I get a migraine or I get this, right? Because you can be a good you can be a good observer because you're with yourself 24/7, right? If you just just pause, we can actually see. And also, you notice what Shaté said is that between acupuncture and massage, right? Like there are different things that we can do. For me, it was yoga that forced me to like pay attention to, and I always think about like financial barriers for our people. And I started doing yoga on YouTube, like watching YouTube. I never went to a class. I couldn't afford a yoga studio. So even if there are things that people mention that might be beneficial, and you may not be able to afford it, like think about using some of your resources like YouTube. There's always people
Absolutely.
talking about different ways. I do meditations, like body scan meditations on YouTube. All of it's free. So I don't want people to stop to get the barrier like, dang, but I can't afford that. So, let's start with what we can afford. Because like I know for our people, like financial barriers is like a huge issue. But I appreciate you sharing those two components on what you've been doing to kind of help with some of those issues.
First of all, thank you for having me pause because I can't keep going. I think that's another symptom of a Black woman and just anxiety.
Yeah.
And I think to your point, there's so many things that I get from YouTube. I do my Pilates practice on YouTube right now. I've done all kinds of like HIIT workouts there. The other thing is massages. Some people think that when you say massage, it's got to be like some fancy hotel at a spa. I found a local place in my community that's Black owned that is like a fraction of the price of a day spa. It doesn't have all the frills like a sauna and a steam room. Right. It's like a family owned business. They've got massage rooms, they got tables, they have all the right things. And I make sure I go there, and get it because it's more affordable. If I want to go every month, nobody's trying to spend $200-$300 a month on a massage experience,
So do a research. Sounds like what you're saying is doing research. And I too, I learned, I go monthly for a massage because I hold a lot of like pain in my body. And it's just one of those like therapeutic components that I've found has worked for me. And so like what works for me and Shaté may work something different for you, for my listeners. So, like I love having different like modalities and learning from people because it really helps us think outside the box, right? If we've only been to church, I've only been in my traumatic home. I don't got no other like resources, but going to party in Tennessee, So being able to hear this stuff, I think is so helpful for people. But I would love to hear about like the Black women piece and how that played a role in kind of like, I got to do this. I got to get this done. I got to do this for this person.
I will. One other thing I want to add that is free and it's very, very helpful is walking. I fell in love with walking during the pandemic. And so just to get around the neighborhood does a lot for my spirit, my energy as well. I will say the Black woman thing is very, very real. I was blessed of the past couple of years to have a leader at my job who was a white woman, but married to a Black man, had Black children. And very committed to dismantling white supremacy. Like who gets that as a Black woman in a corporate setting? And I really, really noticed it when she was asking me to be more vulnerable. She was asking me to trust her with like, if I made a mistake that she would have she was like asking me to show up or inviting me to show up in a different, more vulnerable way. And I was very real with her. I was like, I'm a Black woman. Like when I'm in meetings, I got to watch my face, like make sure I don't look too angry. Am I smiling when I deliver it? Is my tone okay when I'm delivering this? Let me reread the email. How can I be direct and not come off as an angry Black woman? Or I got to make sure I'm prepared because, a white man can show up and just riff and they take his word as gold. And me, I gotta make sure I'm extra buttoned up. Or this just happened to me this week, which is interesting, or the past couple of days. I can be screaming an idea, a thought, and it just kind of, and then a white colleague says it and it's like, oh yeah. And I literally pinged someone and was like, did you not hear me say that? So there's so much of, our identity as a Black woman.
Because a lot of people are struggling with that in corporate America. You said this just happened. Like, what is your outlet for those moments that when those things happen?
Well, I said it in the moment. I sort of wish I had said it to the person directly, but I felt like I had already been showing up as a pushback patty so I just picked my battle in that instance. But I did say it to who I see as an ally. And I was like, did you not hear me say this? And I have two allies in this particular setting. One of them honestly was like, oh, I'm so sorry. You did say that. And the other one is always screaming from the rooftops. Like, Shaté has been saying this. So one, get you an ally. Two, we have a really great ERG that I've been leading for the past couple of years for our Black employees. And what we do is just keep having conversations. So we make sure an employee resource group, so they're basically like affinity groups.
Yeah.
And so they have one for all the different, populations in the organization. But we have conversations with folks about how to talk about race with your manager, or what to do, who to reach out to if you feel like something is racially charged in your interactions, or, just kind of making sure that people are aware of what resources are available and understand how to advocate for themselves. I think a huge part of it is just self-advocacy and knowing how to articulate what you're experiencing in a way that, like, your emotions, the delivery of it doesn't outweigh what you're trying to get across. You know what I mean?
Yeah, which is what they try to do sometimes. But I knew you was an Asian Black woman. Thank you for sharing that. We just kind of, I feel like each of y'all could have been your own podcast. Like, I just going deep in everybody's conversation, but that's why I stopped doing couples therapy, because it was hard for me to, I was like, I don't want no more parts of couples therapy, because, I got to manage two people's emotions, and that was hard. Now that we kind of understand your journey, how did you get to the point of saying, like, I want to create this platform? Because now you're trying to build it out into a community, which it is, where we can speak out loud and be authentic. But what was the starting point? Because I feel like there are people that have these ideas. And, I started this podcast in 2018, but I remember I read this book, and it was like, give yourself a date for the podcast. And I was like, all right, July 2nd, but it was like 2 months before July. I kept going back and forth, like, am I going to do it? Like, I was in my head. So how did you get to the point of creating this platform? And was it a linear journey?
Definitely not a linear journey.
I know. I just gotta
ask. I started the original Love Haze page as an outlet for me when I was transitioning out of my marriage at the time. And it was an opportunity for me to just, like, speak my truth without, saying anything negative about my ex-partner.
Right.
And what I had noticed was, even the conversations that I alluded to earlier that I was having with my friends who had either stayed or who had left their marriage, I would notice that people would, like, disappear off social media, and then they just pop up by themselves. And especially the women that I knew would just pop up going by their first name and their middle name, like, no longer by their last name. And all is like, I don't see that dude no more, And so it was a way for me to start having conversations about what I was actually going through. And I think one of the hardest conversations and one of the hardest parts of going through therapy for me had been guilt versus shame, right? So I was guilty of doing this thing. And I'll always be ashamed to say, a part of the reason why my marriage ended was because I was DMing other women, right? And I needed to be honest about that, because I was guilty of that thing, right? But I didn't need to carry the shame of it.
Yeah.
And I think what made me originally decide that I was going to exit that marriage was I was being asked to carry the shame.
Yeah.
I was being asked not to ask my partner to do anything better in the relationship, because I had the shame over me of this thing that I had done. And I really had to do the work of releasing myself from the shame. Yes, I did the thing, but I'm not the thing. Right. And so starting to have those conversations about, like, yeah, I did it. It was my fault. But when you do something, if this home catches on fire and I'm the reason that it caught on fire because I left a pot on the stove, if Shaté and I both sit back and watch the house burn down, because we need to be able to say, well, it was your fault because you started the fire, then we're just as much as fault for this home being gone because nobody did anything to extinguish the fire, And for me, that person needed to be like, you're guilty, you're guilty, you're guilty. And I was doing that to myself as well. And there was a point to where that's where the God came in with the therapy for me, because God was telling me, like, you did it, but I forgive you and you can be better. And the person was saying, you did it and I can't forgive you and you'll never be better. And there came a point to where I had to choose what God was saying about me.
So you're killing me with the analogies. That was mad dope. Like, you're killing me, yo. Oh my God. Like I want to say, so, oh gosh, two things I want to say for people listening, like that shame, like, I think a lot of people struggle with shame and it's
Yes.
stuff that we can't go back and change. Um, and then for people in relationships, this is so important. Uh, you know, I, when you're wronged, right, you can choose to forgive or choose and continue to go on in the relationship.
Mm-hmm.
But when you choose that I don't want to keep doing, like, I don't want to release what's happened. And I'm not saying it's an overnight thing when something's
No.
happened, but like you're saying, it's kind of like we're both watching the house go down. You're not you as a partner is not, you're not wrong for not wanting to stay with somebody that's harmed you. But then it's
No.
like you're doing yourself a disservice when you're staying and you're choosing not to let it go eventually or work through that,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
And creating more damage to it, right? Like I already have the stove
Mm-hmm.
on the pot. Now I'm gonna add some more paper to it. I'm gonna add some fuel to it.
Mm-hmm.
Like we're just setting this house on fire. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that's powerful because you're literally taking accountability for what happened. You're not placing like
Mm-hmm.
blame on the start. But then if we're a unit, and I'm constantly talking to people about this, if you keep carrying that on, like when you're choosing to be in a relationship, then you're choosing to be miserable. A lot of people in relationships just waiting to like die, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And I think, and because to your point earlier, because like we'll say like, oh, my grandparents was together for 50 years or blah, blah, blah. We don't really know what happened. We don't know how miserable they were. We don't know the pain they went through or suffered or endured. But on the outside, it looked good. And I think, for people listening in relationships, they may be struggling with something that has happened in the past with their partner, and haven't been able to release it. Like, be mindful of how you're harming yourself, right? Like the
Mm-hmm.
act is already done or whatever happens. But to continue harming yourself, you're not being fair to yourself, right? Does that make
Yeah.
sense what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I think the realization that I had to come to, and I probably came to it for her at the time, is that I've done something that you can't get over.
Yeah.
Right.
And
Yep.
that's okay.
Yes, it's
You know,
okay.
you don't have to feel like you're staying with me as some favor to me when you
Right.
know that you can't release me from this thing.
Mm-hmm.
Because what'll happen is you'll never get past this thing. You'll hold this guilt over me, and then I'll have the shame, and you'll say, I don't have to do better because of this thing that you've done. And in 6 months, we'll be right back in this same place because there is something that I was lacking that we need to talk through to get the partnership back on track. And if that is not something that you can invest in, then it's cool.
It's
Like,
okay. Yeah.
right. If we need to say that I was at fault and I'm guilty for that, but I can't carry this shame with you in order for you to just stay. And at some point, I just had to be like, you know what? I'm out
Yeah.
because I've done something that you can't get over. And when you
Right.
can't get over something, you just have to be big enough to say, hey, something has happened so egregious to my moral system or my values that I can't move past it. And now we have to part ways.
Yeah.
So yeah, thank you for sharing that. I know that's going to be such a word for us people on both ends. I think, with really like rethinking like what it looks like in their relationship and trying to come back to the table. I've been married for 14 years, and I it's interesting because like if we're having a disagreement or something, I will struggle with like, because some people be like, oh, I'm gonna make them make them hurt or make them whatever. I can't do that. Like I don't know how to do that. I have to, because I now, and especially in the space that I'm in, I can feel the physical manifestations of how my body responds in real time. Before I never held it in real time. I look to him to like be like everything, like not realizing that's what I was doing. And now that we're in this space, like I feel everything in real time.
Yeah.
And so I just feel more empowered because I can
Mhm.
separate my trauma lens from my actual reality of what my relationship is looking
Mhm.
like, which is a big struggle that couples have in a relationship, right? You got two
Mhm.
individuals, different backgrounds, two different traumas coming together. If you ain't conscious, them trauma lens is going to be looking like your partner in front of you, which is crazy that like it happens and that we don't realize it's happening. Like I hate that for us.
Me too. We had a therapy session a few months ago and our therapist was like, y'all are triggering each other. And we both like, oh, that makes a lot of sense. And I at least had no idea, but it made so much sense. I was like, okay, that really helped me kind of like sit with the situation and process it a little bit.
And so when I get triggered now, like, and it's not that when I'm triggered, I'm able to like pause and feel like, and I'll like hold my heart and I'll say, wow, like this must have been hard for you growing up because the emotion didn't fit the event, you know? And, but I realized it was the lens. So now Scott started this. What made you decide to jump on and kind of create this platform, Shaté?
So I would say that the conversations we have on the podcast are like conversations we were having in our relationship. We were just talking about, that's one of my favorite things about Scott Hayes is the conversations we were having is just unmatched. And so he had been talking about it for a while. Like, I kind of want to do this thing. And I think it could be like this. And I was like, let's do it then. You know, here's the website, turn up. We start on this day and this is what it's going to look like. And that's literally how it went. He said there was a desire. I saw it because like, just talk to him. Like you heard it, just like, of course there's something there. There's a there. So I was like, let's just be about it.
So now that you are in this thing, do you ever go back and forth like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I have this thing and I'm talking about this stuff?
I don't. So with my dance career, the way the evolution happened was I was performing and choreographing and teaching. And then I started creating content back then for dancers, like teaching them how to build their careers, right? So I was blogging, I had a podcast, but I only did about 20 episodes because for me, it was like, I think dancers found it interesting, but it wasn't as impactful as I thought it could be, or that's not the right word. I think actually, if I could tell the truth, I think I was evolving. I started to evolve. And so the content wasn't as interesting anymore, but I had built this really robust body of work that I still have to this day. And I think it opened a lot of great doors for me. I think it served the purpose that it was supposed to serve. So then fast forward, I'm evolving into this other person and my partner's like, hey, let's do this. I was able to bring all of that I had already done before to this. And so now it just feels like I'm glad we've stuck with it. I actually have a thought partner. That's so helpful because when you're trying to do it all by yourself, it's kind of like, what am I talking about? Who's going to do it? You know, like, and so now I just feel like I'm at the place where like our thought partnership is invaluable. So we just kind of, you know, we'll be watching TV or something comes on the radio and we're like, ooh, that's a good topic. We should talk about that. And we just collect ideas and talk about them.
Sorry, only because you use this word evolving and people need to hear like your mindset around that because I think as people are evolving, they think they're failing. So how you just switch that up. Can you just explain to my audience like what you meant by that?
Yeah, I never saw the day where I never thought I would ever outgrow dance. I've been dancing since I was like three or four, and it has been a constant throughout my entire life. And it's funny because I never thought I would have a career in it either. I didn't set out being like, oh, I want to be a professional dancer. It's just the thing that always gave me joy. And I was like, whatever I do for a living, I want to be able to enjoy it. And I've just always performed. So I packed up and moved. And even throughout my dance career, as I was trying to figure out how to make a sustainable career happen, I evolved in different ways. So it started off as performing. Then I did more choreography. I went and got a master's. I started teaching. So I started writing. I just tried all these different ways to keep dance in my life until one day it just didn't feel as fun anymore. And that's I don't want to say fun as it just didn't light me up in the same way. I started to have other interests, other curiosities. And I remember that very clearly. It came out of nowhere. I was adjudicating this dance festival, like this concert, and I had taught these classes. And I was on my way back to where I lived at the time to go and teach. And I remember hearing in the car very clearly, like, I think I'm done with this. I made for more. It was just a very still, small voice, like they say, that was like, I'm made for more. I had no idea what the more was. I didn't know what I was heading to, but I knew very certainly like that version of my life was over. I had a full-on identity crisis afterwards also, because I was like, if I'm not a dancer, then who am I? I'm a person that really, like, my work, I embody it and I take on the identity of it. And I don't know how healthy that is. My therapist is always telling me like to stop it, but I don't know how else to be. And so I did start to evolve past it. And it was a very difficult transition for me, but I found my way. And so, you know, I can talk for days just on that stuff.
You know what's interesting? What's interesting to me is I see a through line in both of our journeys, right? In that we both, in our own way, came to figuring out in real time the art of transition, right? How do you figure your way out through the intersection that life throws you? Like, I get to this point. This is what I thought I was going to be. I remember somebody was trying to sell me on like selling noni tea or something one time when I was like in my early 30s. And the lady was like, well, what do you want to be? And I was like, a husband. And she was like, well, what do you want your legacy to look like? And all I had ever thought about was being a husband is what I had desired. And to get to that point in my life and to be experiencing divorce, I didn't know what my identity looked like outside of that. And I had to learn that I was so much more than just somebody's husband. Even though that was my original desire, I wanted to be someone that someone wanted and depended on. But the way that life took me, I was built for more. And, you know, God and therapy really had to put me in touch with what that more is. And it was about having conversations about teaching people how to navigate the transitions of life, whether you choose to stay in relationship or go, whether you choose to stay in career or go. It is about learning how to navigate those journeys and doing so without kicking your own behind, you know, about the choices that you've made, giving yourself the freedom to err and correct, to ebb and flow, to, you know, be fluid in your movement and to forgive yourself when you don't get it right.
And to become. Give yourself the freedom to become. Yeah.
Oh, you guys are giving me chills, man. This was so good. One thing that they say on their podcast is we're always growing and healing. And I think listening to both of their journey just speaks volumes to that, right? And all of the transitions and, you know, between both of you, there was this identity that you held. I mean, I know you specifically talked about it, Shaté, around the identity, but then you're talking about the identity of being a husband and like what that looked like and having to grieve, like, you know what, like there's more, right? And I do find that when we don't live out our potential or our purpose, we do like feel like we're suffocating. We feel like we're drowning, right? And so, but also it's like making that pivot, like you said, was scary. It was hard, right? Both were hard, but one has a different kind of like ending than the other. The other one is like you live harder. You know, Les Brown, he's a motivational speaker, says there's a bunch of dreams in the graveyard. I think because we tend to like struggle with the starting part. Does that sound accurate?
Absolutely. A lot of people just allow the fear, like, you know, to overtake them. And we often say like, okay, you got to make choices towards who you're trying to become. That's the thing. But you're going to feel the fear. Fear is good for you. It's there to keep us safe, right? But then like, what are you going to do with that? So if I know I'm ready to evolve, but I'm scared because I don't know what's out there, you know, what's the thing they say? You know, I get my sayings wrong. The devil I know versus the devil I don't, or something like that. And so you just know this. And so I might as well stay because I know how to do this. But who do you want to become? Is who you want to become this version of you? Or do I see myself as something else? And then even if it is scary, how can I make the first choice towards that? And even if it is scary and uncomfortable, you know, you're at least going in the right direction because you're going towards who you aspire to be, you know?
And in order to know who you're inspired to be, you got to ask yourself the questions. Somebody just happened to ask Scott, but even if we don't have nobody asking those questions, we can ask ourselves those questions. And I'm telling you now, audience, you may not get an answer, but your mind starts to look for evidence and help you see that, right? When people start therapy and I say, you know, for people that believe in God, but if not, I just say, you know, the universe will start to show you signs, you know, just like whatever car you drive, you see it all the time because your mind is seeing it. But if you're giving your mind a new way to think, and your desire to become, your mind will start to show you how that can happen. Like, and you guys are witnesses of it, right?
Mm-hmm. Amen.
Amen.
This was like so amazing. Like, literally, there's so many topics that you guys got to put on your podcast. They talk about everything. So I want to leave the end because I want you all to talk about your platform, like what it's about. What are you hoping for people to gain from it? Because you're building out a community, which is so beautiful because it's not like pretty. It's not just all glitz and glams that you're talking about, right? Like you're talking about some real stuff that feels like a little group therapy session, but tell people about the platform and what you're hoping people to gain from it as they kind of join and go onto your website and to learn more about you.
You want to start off?
Sure. I think really what my hope is that we will be able to build a community where people can feel like they belong. I really hope and desire to be the thing that I needed when I started, making those initial realizations about myself and who I was and what I needed. There are so many things that I needed that I didn't have. And I really want to create space and cultivate space and community where people can feel like they belong. And the truth is that we all belong, right? We all experience change. We experience hurt. We experience disappointment. And I want folk to know that they can be a part of this community where we all feel what we feel. We all experience all of our emotions, but we don't let our emotions guide our decisions. And we can belong in this community and have these conversations and just be honest and process through and then make the best choice that is for us. So one of my passions is not only the Love Haze, but for men, and specifically for Black men. So I do live events called Man to Man, where we gather and just, grab a couple bourbons and just have some honest conversation about what we experience as Black men, showing up in our communities, showing up in relationship and creating a safe space, but not only a safe space, but a brave space where if somebody is going the wrong way, it can be another brother who can call him out on that and have that space to be able to do that and build that community in that way as well. So, my idea is that we'll have the Love Haze and then we'll have branches of it that are specific for Black women, for Black men, for whatever it is that you need, you still belong here.
I don't think there's anything else I can add. Like belonging, inspiration on our website. I know you're going to link out to all of it. It's thelovehaze.co. And then we're on our socials at the Love Haze. We have there like belong, be inspired, begin your next step. And so in addition to belonging, can you learn something? I think for me, I as you were talking, I was sitting here thinking about, that idea of normalizing and like what we're going through. We're not alone. Someone else has gone through it. And you're an avid Yelper. I'm always looking for testimonials and referrals. And if I think about it, brass tacks, like we want to be a place, I think, where folks can get like the testimonials of the hardships of life. You know what I mean? Like not even just like how you made it out, but the actual, like, I actually went through this thing. Like it happened to me. And so you're not the only person that has happened to. We should figure that out actually. Just like collect stories of how life has lifed and you're going to be all right.
Yeah.
You need to hear that, and I think the movement really is community care, right? There's not enough therapists. Everybody can't afford therapy. And I'm really big on talking about community and finding your tribe. It's such a powerful thing, but also I think as Black people and growing up very individualistic and you just got to like keep going. I think it's hard for us to ask for help and hard for us to lean into those spaces. But my audience knows I talk about it all the time, but listening to Scott and Shaté talk about their journey and then how like community has been such a huge turning point for them. Like I hope people can get something from it and really work on kind of finding their tribe. And you can start with the Love Haze podcast that has so many different journeys and episodes that are really great. They're short and they're easy to listen to on your way to work. Just your authenticity, I just love it. And I appreciate what you're doing for the community because it's needed.
Thank you so much, Celeste.
Thank you for having us too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hopefully I wasn't too hard on you guys. Thank you so much. Do you have any last words you want to tell the people before we go?
No, I just want to say to you, thank you again. Congrats. You have an amazing body of work and podcasting. That's amazing. Over 400 episodes. And like what you're doing here is not lost on us either. Shifting the way you think is so important because I think our community, we were sort of taught by either church or by life how to like show up in the world a certain way. And so to invite people and inspire people to think differently, because how you think is how your life will turn out. Like those thoughts become your entire life. And so I think what you're doing is amazing. So thank you again.